Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Marcy Pilate, and my co-presenter today is Dr. Thomas Roduta, and we will be presenting the final lecture in the TED Talk series entitled Project Management that has been brought to you by the Houston program. So first, I want to start with the basics of what is project management. So the Project Management Institute actually defines a project and actually describes a project and uses those things to come up with the definition that project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet the project requirements. Before I get more into project management, I do want to touch on things that lead to project failure. So failure to align the project with organizational objectives. So especially if you're new into an organization or if you've only been there a short time, you don't want to come up with a project that has nothing to do with where the organization will be moving in the future. You want to make sure that your project aligns with the actual goals of the organization. Poor scope, so making sure that you have a project that is reasonable to be completed in a reasonable amount of time, but also something that is able to be completed by your team. So if you have a team of 3 people, you don't want to potentially have a project that might need to involve 5 to 10 people. So keeping the scope within a reasonable amount is good. Unrealistic expectations, so not having a project that you think you can implement in 3 months, knowing that it might take a whole year to implement. Lack of executive sponsorship, so if your boss doesn't agree with it, then I probably would not begin that project. Lack of project management, so essentially all projects will require a project manager, or should have a project manager in order for them to succeed, and the inability to move beyond individual and personality conflicts. So this is a big thing. So just because you don't like someone doesn't mean that you all cannot successfully complete a project together. I think that might be a barrier for some people, but you need to get over that, and a project is for a temporary and short period of time. So get over it and complete the project, and then you will be successful. So contributions to project success. So again, having the sponsorship, a good project charter, strong project management. So someone with some expertise in the area, or someone who has had several projects completed successfully before. The right mix of team players. So don't get a lot of people whose strengths are creativity. You want a little bit of variety. So organizational skills, being able to work on a team. So you want a mix so you can work off of the various strengths of those team members. Good decision-making structure. Good communication, again, is key. So you might want to time your communication, whether it needs to be daily, weekly, or monthly with your other team members, depending on the needs of the project. And then team members working towards common goals. So everyone needs to know where everyone is going. So you can't have the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing. So again, that also ties back to communication, but just making sure everyone's on the same page. So now we'll get into the actual project management, and this slide just demonstrates the different cycles of the project. So there's 5 general cycles of the project that we'll be discussing today. The first is definition, so identifying stakeholders, so people who actually have interest in the project and who will actually want to benefit from the project is where you would start. So depending on the type of project, there might be someone within your department or someone outside of your department. And depending on if you need money, it might be someone outside of your department, like your CFO. Feedback, so having someone who can provide appropriate feedback is a stakeholder that you need. So someone who won't tell you everything that you want to hear just because you want to hear it. So you need someone who will give you good constructive criticism so that you can progress appropriately with the project. You also want a stakeholder who will give you guidance. So again, this comes with experience, someone who might have completed a project before, and people who may be affected. So you want to also include people who might be end users of whatever the project results, or someone who will be affected while the project is going on. For instance, if you have to pull employees from their regular duties to participate in this particular project. Also with defining, you have brainstorming, and so in the earlier TED Talk lecture, there were lots of different brainstorming ideas, giving different ways to brainstorm, so you want to use some of those techniques in your brainstorming, and then after that formulate the ideas into goals, specifics, tasks, responsibilities, and requirements. And the tasks are especially important because sometimes I've been in meetings where you have projects being discussed, but they do not exactly assign tasks or deadlines, and then you leave the project and you meet again and nothing's been accomplished because no one actually received any tasks or responsibilities. And then knowing the requirements, so knowing what exactly you need from your personnel, knowing what finances you need, if you need data, whatever you might need to get the project going. The next is plan. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered with planning. And this might be the time where you would introduce a project manager, because the project manager will ultimately manage all of the answers to these questions, because they'll manage the resources, they'll manage the time, they'll manage the scope. And so you need to answer all of the questions listed here in order to appropriately plan out your project. And then once you answer those questions, you can actually develop a project plan. And the project plan can also be used to keep you on task. So the problem statement will keep you in the scope. So it will let you know what exactly you're trying to accomplish, why you're trying to accomplish these things, and to keep you on that focus. Because a lot of times if you get into a project, you learn about other issues that you might be having or other problems that you might have, and you might want to jump in to try to fix those problems within this project. But if you keep focus on the problem statement, then it'll help keep you focused. The project mission statement is important so you can always remember why you're completing this project. The objectives, so the objectives can be used simply as milestones. So you can use those to keep you on task after you achieve one objective, and then you can see what you need to do to achieve the second objective and the third, and then next thing you know, you might be done with the project. And then the project work requirements. So how many people do you need? How much money you may need? How will this affect their other jobs? What will it require them to work longer hours? What else would you need? And then exit criteria. So once you've done all these things, how are you going to close this project and move on to the next?
So like Dr. Pilate said, we are at ready and aim, and usually a lot of projects stop right there. Ready, aim, 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 aim. So now put your plan into action. Ready, aim, fire. So project execution. In the execution phase, the team and necessary resources should already be in place and ready to perform those project activities. And the project plan should have been completed, and all of those reports should be at baseline. So in the execution phase, there's two parts, and I apologize, it's kind of grainy. You have to perform the required tasks, so perform all of your deliverables, as well as monitor and control this performance. This is a very busy slide, but I'm going to walk you through it. So in the executing process, let's start with direct and manage project work. So that's where your deliverables come from. Your work performance data, your change request. Some of these activities, you're managing these risks, you're performing activities to accomplish your objectives that you developed in your planning stage, and then you're managing your team, you're managing your sellers and your suppliers as well as your stakeholders. The next one is to perform quality assurance. That's the most important thing. We need to make sure that everything that we're doing is up to par with the quality standards and operational definitions that we put in the beginning, and that you're executing the project the way you want it to be. The next four, so acquire your project team, develop your project team, manage your project team, as well as manage your communications, is exactly what Dr. Pilate said earlier. You don't know what your team is, your team is going to react as the situation unfolds. However, you have to be able to work with each other, and you want to have a good mix of a team so that not everyone is just good in creativity, but everyone can bring a piece to this execution phase. Conduct procurements, meaning you are selecting your seller, you're awarding a contract, signing agreement, and it's essentially a statement of the work. Lastly, managing your stakeholders and engagements. You have to manage their expectations. You want to know what their needs are, and you have to address it during the project life cycle. Like Dr. Pilate was saying earlier, the project manager is very important in execution of the project. The project manager focus now shifts from planning all the way to participating, observing, analyzing the work being done, essentially getting into the work. The project manager's responsibilities do not stop once the planning of the project is done. In fact, the visibility of that role is intensified. It's important that the project manager keeps from getting into the weeds, essentially so that they can focus their attention to enabling the project plans, processes, and managing the expectations, especially for your customers and stakeholders. Lastly, their focus moves to quality. Like I said earlier, you need to establish baselines. Your reports, your data needs to be at baseline. Your baseline indicates that you are no longer in this planning stage, but that you're moving into the execution stage. And you have to be aware of your triple constraint, your cost, your time, and your scope, which I'll get into in a little bit later. All of this needs to be communicated. Earlier last week, Dr. Grego said that communication is one of the biggest things that you need within a project execution. You should use all forms of communication, text format, reports, graphs, charts, as well as any kind of diagrams. The second part of the phase, remember, was monitoring your progress. You need to make sure that all parts are continuing as planned. You can have regular meetings, you can build these reports, you can observe directly, indirectly, create checklists, Gantt charts, and then you also want to look at your risks, your accomplishments, and the lessons. There will be challenges, no doubt, but don't panic. There are 3 different methods that you can use to combat these triple constraints. The first one is crashing, so you could reduce the schedule without changing the budget, so using cheaper resources or by reevaluating time estimates. The next one is fast tracking. So this can be done with the schedule. Look at the schedule to see if any of the things can be done concurrently so that you can move things along. Lastly, de-scoping. Are any of the things in your project that are a little bit out of scope that you can remove? So de-scoping some of the activities or the objectives. This here is what the execution phase produces. It produces your deliverables. It produces change management documents as things move. Of course, there's going to be change, and you have to manage that change. You're going to have to build reports, so you're managing these project activities and looking at the scope, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Lastly, once you've gotten these reports, once you've identified what needs to change and have all these deliverables, you need to identify what needs to be done. What are the next steps? How can we improve without going out of scope of your original project? This here is a pyramid of the execution process. Essentially, like I said, it ensures that the planned project activities are carried out in an effective and efficient way, while ensuring that measurements against project plan specifications and the original project feasibility concept continue to be collected, analyzed, and acted on throughout the project life cycle. So these are your key takeaways. You procure your resources, you have your products and deliverables, you make sure that the project is kept on track and that the majority of the work is conducted efficiently and that your team is happy with the product.
So for the 4th phase of controlling the project, I really think it's important to have team members self-control. And so you can accomplish that by several different ways. So clearly defining duties with the purpose stated. So essentially you want clearly defined duties because you don't want a team member to have less or more duties than the other, because if you do not define the duties, then you might have one team member doing everything of all 5 people. And then a personal plan for how to do the actual required work. And so the plan needs to be maybe a timeline, or maybe it can be how they will start the plan and then how they'll communicate up with you later or with the other members of the team. And skills and resources adequate to the task. So you don't want to assign a task to someone who does not have the skill set to complete that task, because then you'll meet back up with them later and it won't be completed. And feedback on progress that comes directly from the work itself. So the feedback on progress can be delivered via progress report. So you can have one of the team members submit weekly or monthly or bi-weekly progress reports. And if you don't feel that that person is where you need them to be, you can say, well, I thought maybe you would have been this far by now, or maybe you are actually moving ahead of time. Would you like to have more duties to successfully complete the project or actually complete it ahead of schedule?
So you reached a point where you feel like everything's been checked off, the tasks in your projects are complete, but it doesn't stop there. So you have to go through a closing out of your project phase. So you need to schedule and conduct a review meeting. You need to discuss and document the lessons learned, which I'll talk about in a second. Update the organization on the process and assets and any of the things that you've learned, and then release your project resources. It's important that you define the end at the beginning of the project. You need to know what you're going to procure during that time, and you need to know exactly what your stakeholders want, because by the time you get to the end, you want to do more. You want to continue this project. You want to add a little bit more and kind of change the scope of your project, because CQI, continuous quality improvement, is exactly what we are all about. But there are 4 areas that you can focus on that you know that this is the end of your project. You need to gain your stakeholder or your project sponsor's acceptance. So make sure that your advisor, your project manager, your stakeholder, your team members are happy where it's at, that you have addressed the goal that you initially set. You need to conduct project assessment. So what did you learn? This is where you can give feedback. This is where lessons learned is important. The third one is to complete project history and archive. This is actually very important that a lot of people don't do, but this is something that Dr. Andreas Mesny talked about, is that you want to document this very, very thoroughly, because you don't want to have to recreate this process again. By the end of the project, you should have created a process that should be replicable, and that if someone else wants to do it, they don't have to recreate the wheel. Lastly, celebrate success. It's important that even with your smallest successes that you have to celebrate them as they continue, but when you close the project, that is the biggest celebration. The next few slides are kind of last-minute things that you should do. Discuss your lessons that you learned, meet with the team members and stakeholders, and ensure that everyone is aware of the challenges and what you did to resolve them. Even if something was a mistake or a failed endeavor, it's not entirely wasted, especially if you learned something during that, and that's something that you should communicate as well. You should look at things that you can apply to future projects, and then lessons learned should be documented and included with the final project documentation. Next, like Dr. Pilate said, and also Dr. Grego earlier, you defined your scope in the beginning, but you also have to verify the scope at the end. Did the project do what it was set out to do? Were all needs met? Were all wants met? Were the SMART goals achieved? Did we deliver all of the deliverables? And are all the team members happy? Are we missing something? So there's actually 2 things that you can do if at the end of the project you're trying to close out and oops, we forgot to do something. So you have two options. You can return to the planning phase and create a plan to complete those missed tasks, or you can choose to leave them out as kind of unmet, or create a separate project for it. Essentially, don't make this missing something keep you from closing your project. Lastly, this is your final to-do list. Pass on your appropriate project information to the appropriate people. Ensure all payments have been made, especially if you had to procure something during that time. Dispose of or return any of those materials as well. And then you want to complete and compile all documents. So your project charter, your project plan, any of the change management requests. You want to document any of those lessons learned. You want to do minutes of any meeting that you had and all of the status reports and data. And that's all, folks. Thank you for joining the Houston program during this TED Talk series of project management.